Hello everybody, welcome to Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old, and today I'm talking about Jean-Michel Jarre's Waiting for Cousteau. Alright then, we've officially made it into 90s Jarre. This is another weird point in the Jarre catalog, and not weird in the same way Revolutions is a weird point. Waiting for Cousteau is one of those albums that just really sticks out whenever you just look through all the stuff he's released, even before you've listened to it. You just look at his albums and their track listings, you go through them, oh here's an album with no track titles, here's another album with no track titles, here's an album with track titles but otherwise kind of looks the same as the others. Whoa, okay, here's one that has a track that's 46 minutes long, and 3 others called Calypso? What the heck? But albums like these are kind of why I like Jarre as much as I do. This isn't even among the best or most cohesive work he's had to offer over the years, nor is it one that I actually have a lot to say about, but I like that it's a clear change of pace, and Jarre is pushing himself into new territory that isn't necessarily just in his comfort zone. Without albums like these, I don't think I'd be giving Jarre as much credit as I typically do. Now I guess I have to start with the Calypso suite, and I will freely admit this is a pretty weird move for Jarre. Because when you think of legendary electronic music pioneers, Calypso is not one of those things you'd expect to show up. Even with the knowledge of how Jarre tends to go into this kind of overly cheesy and silly territory, and how he likes making tributes to other parts of the world, like on Zuluk and parts of Revolutions. But going as far as to actually make a 3-part Calypso track, just straight going for that Caribbean vibe as hard as he can, that kind of came out of left field. But despite how freaking weird the idea is, I think the Calypso suite is actually pretty underrated. Like, part 1 delivers exactly what you thought you were going to get when you saw the title. It's a super happy, sunny, and upbeat track covered in steel drums and other synth progressions in the background. Maybe not the kind of thing you'd be able to guess that came out of legendary synth pioneer Jean-Michel Jarre. I think you'd maybe be more likely to guess that it was like some kind of tropical Mario Kart theme. But it's not like there wasn't precedent for this kind of stuff with tracks like Computer Weekend in September from his last album. And it doesn't come off as disrespectful, really, either. Maybe kind of cliched, but it sounds like Jarre made it because he liked the way the genre sounded originally. And let me tell you, Calypso is the kind of genre that can become incredibly cringeworthy if you do it wrong. Like a college I went to once put up a concert of Calypso versions of Beatles songs. I checked it out of morbid curiosity, and even though they weren't badly done for what they were, just the idea of it and this mashing up of these genres that just did not belong together at all, it was just so terrible to me. I just walked out of the concert early. I've never been more pissed off at a concert that I've went to in my entire life. This could have similarly been really terrible, but it wasn't. This at least sounds like the kind of thing that makes sense being played on steel drums. Anyways, with part 2 of the Calypso suite, things get a little more interesting and more obviously orchestrated by Jarre, because, it's 2 tracks in one. First half is mainly just synth work. It's a bit darker than the first part, and the second half brings the steel drums back in, gets a little peppier again. And then you add in part 3, subtitled Fin de Siècle, or End of Century. This part actually doesn't sound all that Calypso-y. It just kind of sounds like an alternate version of his Souvenir of China single. It's very slow-moving percussion, but dramatic synth progression, and a synth setting on top that I guess is trying to sound tropical in some way. And a weird-sounding guitar solo in there for some reason, too. It's alright, it works as an ending to the suite, but it's far from the best thing he's ever done. Yeah, I'll admit, the Calypso suite as a whole is admittedly a little spotty, but even this last part isn't that bad either. No one ever mentions these tracks among the pantheon of classic Jarre work, and honestly, that's probably for good reason, but I still enjoy them anytime I actually put them on. The corniness doesn't get to me in the same way something like September did. Even that one only got to me because of how irritatingly catchy it was. Jean-Michel Jarre's Calypso Suite is obviously pretty corny. Just Jean-Michel Jarre's Calypso Suite. If it wasn't corny, something would be wrong with the world. But honestly, it could have been a lot worse than it actually is. It's a fun little set of tunes to put on every now and then, I'll say that. But of course I've spoken enough on the topic of this suite. It's not the main reason to check this album out. No, of course the main reason to check out Waiting for Cousteau is of course the 46-minute title track. Now I'll freely admit on first listen of this thing, I didn't like it at all. Because nothing really happens in it. It's a long-form ambient piece, creating one singular atmosphere and sticking to the same set of sounds throughout its entire running time. You got a set of cascading, watery washes of synth bleeping covered in reverb, plenty of slow-moving but haunting synth pads, some bassier and some that almost resemble choirs, and little individual piano notes played at fairly regular intervals. I think there's some other sound effects like crickets and some weird animal growling at other points, but whatever. It just kind of stays the same the entire time, like if you were waiting for Cousteau in his little submarine world, except Cousteau himself never actually shows up. Long-form ambient pieces like these are not always the kind of thing I can easily get into, but so long as the atmosphere you initially started with was compelling enough to justify immersing yourself in for that long, I won't have any problems. Like, I've enjoyed Brian Eno's discrete music and Neroli before. Those are pretty long ambient pieces where nothing really happens. But I was also iffy on his Thursday Afternoon album, and to use a more recent example, I wasn't too keen on Audicker's All End from their most recent project. In the case of those two, I just wasn't invested enough in the initial setup to fully keep my attention for the entire roughly hour-long runtimes. Waiting for Cousteau, though? This is beautiful. It's the kind of thing that just got better and better every time I heard it. I mean, I listened to the album all the way through, twice today, and I'm still not remotely sick of the way Waiting for Cousteau sounds. It may not change much over its running time, but that initial setup was at least dynamic and textured enough to envelop me in the first place, and it's excellent stuff. It's actually probably the single most relaxing piece of Jarre's entire career. It went from one of my least favorite Jarre tracks to one of my favorites over the course of all these years. As far as straight ambient stuff like this goes, I think it's absolutely worth people's time. Now, as for the album as a whole, really the only thing I have left to add is that the Calypso Suite and the title track really have nothing to do with each other. Besides, I guess they're water-themed, maybe? And that Calypso is kind of reminds you by the beach, and then the title track is you go underwater, actually. But, like, the Calypso Suite is just cheesy and silly fun, and the title track is just much more serious. I'm not always in the mood to listen to both at once. And the entire Calypso Suite, for what it's worth, it just completely disappears from my mind pretty quickly. Like 2 minutes or so into the title track and it's basically all gone. Stuff like this is what prevents the album from being truly great in my eyes. But I don't think it weighs it down the album that much. Because even if it's not the best constructed Jarre album in the world, I do at least consistently enjoy the whole thing. Waiting for Cousteau is not a perfect album by any stretch, but stuff like this adds so much to the whole mystique of Jarre's career that he could still deliver an album this good in 1990 while still pushing himself into new territory and not feeling totally behind the times. I think it's definitely something worth praising him for, and I'd definitely give this whole album my recommendation. The more Jarre releases unconventional stuff like this, the happier I tend to be. So yeah, I'm overall feeling a 7.7 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. If you want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.